First, when Birthright goes wrong. That's the focus of tonight's angle. From the second President Trump announced his plans to address birthright citizenship earlier today, the left freaked out. Now, here's what the president told Axios.
We're the only country in the world where a person comes in, has a baby, and the baby is essentially a citizen of the United States for 85 years with all of those benefits. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And it has to end.
Have you talked about that with counsel?
Yeah, I have.
So where in the process?
It's in the process. It'll happen with an executive order.
An executive order. Now, predictably, Open Borders media types were quick to denounce the president and condemn his even raising the idea of ending birthright citizenship.
As if we needed it, there's more evidence that immigration remains the president's animating issue. His new proposal to end birthright citizenship.
He's talking about birthright citizenship, and I think he's done that just simply to inflame the issue.
I mean, this is the hardline immigration message. The fear of immigrants changing the way of life of Americans.
Really harkens back to some of the darkest chapters in America's history when in 1857, the Dred Scott decision.
Well, move over Encyclopedia Britannica. Well, look, this is the default behavior of all those afflicted with Trump derangement syndrome when they're faced with an inconvenient truth. They demonize the president and just dismiss out of hand the issue. Heaven forbid we actually present the American people with a factual, unbiased presentation of the issues. Now, first of all, President Trump had already committed to ending birthright citizenship during the campaign. So aside from his mentioning the drafting of an executive order, the pathway to fulfilling this promise, hardly a newsflash. And why is this an important issue in the first place for the president and so many of his supporters, and I would dare say Democrats as well? A lot of it goes to the money. Consider the number of children born to illegals each year. Back in 2010, the Center for Immigration Studies estimated that between 300,000 and 400,000 are born to illegal aliens in the United States annually. Now, that figure is bound to be a lot higher today, given the new research that the number of illegals in the U.S. is at least double what was originally thought, or about 22 million. So let's conservatively say that 400,000 children are born every year in the United States to illegal immigrants. Well, those are people that hardworking U.S. taxpayers have to educate and for whom they provide health care and, in many cases, food stamps, obviously infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. CIS estimates that the annual cost to the U.S. taxpayers of children born to illegal aliens is a staggering $2.4 billion. You think our vets and our homeless and our inner city schools could use that money? Maybe we could even pay down some of the debt. Well, to burrow down a little further, a 2015 CIS report found 51% of immigrant-headed households used at least one federal program: cash, food, housing, or medical care, compared to only 30% of native households. And we aren't just talking, by the way, about folks on visa overstays or who cross the border illegally. Many of you would be stunned to know that there are entire industries, both here and abroad, that are now devoted to gaming the birthright citizenship system. It's called birth tourism, and it's become big business in the United States, attracting immigrants from China, Taiwan, Mexico, Russia, and Turkey. What they do is they purchase package deals where they can come to the U.S. as a visitor for a few months or several months and have their baby on American soil. For upwards of $50,000, these foreigners are guaranteed U.S. citizenship for their children. It's wild. And that furnishes them, of course, with preferential college treatment when the kids reach age 18. And they also can sponsor their parents for green cards on their 21st birthday. That's pretty nifty. Now, I'm sure this is what our founders intended when they were drafting the 14th Amendment, right? Now, contrary to what Obama and so many on the left are saying today, President Trump, by questioning this birthright citizenship, mantra, is provoking a conversation that I think is sorely needed in the country. So rather than just castigating the president or caricaturing his position, why not have a substantive debate on it? How we want to proceed with immigration in the United States seems like a worthy conversation to me to have, especially during the midterm election. And up until now, Trump is the only president who's been willing to have that debate. What are the Democrats afraid of here? And that's the angle. Joining me now with a reaction, Dr. John Eastman is a senior fellow at the Claremont Institute and constitutional law professor at Chapman University. And Andy McCarthy is a contributing editor at National Review and a Fox News contributor. John, I want to start with you because you wrote in the New York Times that birthright citizenship is not actually in the Constitution. So why does the left think it is?
Well, they've misunderstood one of the clauses in the Constitution. There's actually two requirements for automatic citizenship. You got to be born on U.S. soil, and you have to be subject to the jurisdiction. And they just read that last clause out of the Constitution as if it's not there, or as if it means the same thing as being physically present here. But for those that ratified, those that drafted that language, it meant subject to the complete jurisdiction, not subject to allegiance to any foreign power. And that's what mandates birthright citizenship. So the children of citizens, the children of lawful permanent residents, they're automatically citizens if they're born here. But the children of temporary visitors or people who overstay their visas, and certainly the children of people who are not even lawfully present in the United States at all, are not automatically citizens according to the Constitution. And President Trump's executive order just wants to get the Constitution right.
Well, Andy, the reaction today was just over the top, hyperbolic. Even Paul Ryan, we're going to play a little clip from this. Paul Ryan said this, I believe it was on a radio show. Let's listen.
You cannot end birthright citizenship with an executive order. We didn't like it when Obama tried changing immigration laws via executive action, and obviously as conservatives, we believe in the Constitution. As a conservative, I'm a believer in following the plain text of the Constitution, and I think in this case the 14th Amendment's pretty clear.
Andy McCarthy, Paul Ryan, outgoing Speaker of the House, not giving Trump any help there, but he said, we got to have congressional action. Is that true?
Well, I think they should have congressional action, Laura. As a practical matter, personally, I think this is a constitutional provision of the 14th Amendment where we're not only just dealing with the constitutional provision, it's also been codified by Congress. I think they've made pretty clear that they want to weigh in here and that they feel like, and rightly so, that they are the supreme branch of the three in terms of defining citizenship. So I think there's a very good argument that Trump shouldn't do this by executive order. As a practical matter, I must tell you, I think the way the Supreme Court lines up, the only way they have a chance of succeeding on what I and my friend John Eastman think is the correct policy is by getting it done by statute rather than executive order. But when Ryan says that the Constitution's pretty clear, I don't know what Constitution he's reading, because as John just pointed out, there's a very strong interpretation of it that goes back to the people who actually defined it at the time that it was ratified, that runs 180 degrees different from the way that Ryan is interpreting it.
John Eastman, I want to go back to you on this. Again, I think people, and Andy talked about how this has been codified by Congress. I think he's talking about, again, we don't want to get into the weeds on the law, people's eyes will glaze over, but Section 1401 of the applicable code. Now, what is Andy talking about? And again, does this mean that the president, as the chief executive officer of the United States, with a concern about who comes into the country, who does not come into the country, who's a citizenship and who doesn't get citizenship, that he doesn't have the right to do this? Explain the 1401 issue.
Well, the 1401 issue, Congress has a statute that defines citizenship, but it uses the exact same language as the Constitution. So we've got to figure out what the Constitution means. And like I said before, there are two requirements: born here and subject to the jurisdiction. Let me give an example. If a British citizen is over here as a tourist, he has to comply with our laws while he's here. He drives on the right side of the road, not the left side of the road. But he's not subject to our allegiance. He doesn't get drafted into our army. He's subject to the party partial territorial jurisdiction, not the complete jurisdiction that was intended. And what the president is trying to do is just enforce that law as written. And I'll give you one very good example, and I think Andy will agree with me on this. You've got to be a citizen in order to get a passport. The one thing that everybody agrees with is that the subject to the jurisdiction clause at least excludes the children of diplomats who are here. And yet our passport office is unlawfully giving passports and deeming as citizens the children of diplomats who are clearly not covered by the 14th Amendment. So the president's executive order could, for example, just tell the passport office to quit violating the law. That would be well within his rights as the chief executive of the country.
Well, Chuck Grassley looks like he agreed with Paul Ryan today, which was a little disappointing for those of us who really like Chuck Grassley. I want to just go through a list of the countries, not that this matters because we have our own constitutional understanding, but that do not offer birthright citizenship. Most of the developed countries, other than Canada: Australia, Austria, Denmark, France, Germany, Israel, Italy, Japan, New Zealand, Norway, Slovakia, South Korea, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, the UK. None of them offer this type of birthright citizenship, which, Andy, we're going to get into this in a moment. It does create perverse incentives. And this birth tourism issue, which we're going to get into deeply here, it's a huge problem. And we have horrible situations happening in New York and California where there are abuses and so forth. How do you think this ultimately comes down, Andy?
I think a lot of it depends on how it goes up to the Supreme Court, Laura. You're quite right. You know, look, when you hear people defend this, what they say is that this is absolutely what the 14th Amendment requires. They never say that this is good policy because it's indefensible policy. But I just think, having fought the old military commissions battle back, 10, 12 years ago, however long it was, there was a lot of authority that President Bush had to unilaterally order military commissions, and the court told him, nevertheless, that he needed Congress. And I just think, if this goes up to the Supreme Court as an executive order, we lose. If it goes up to the Supreme Court as a statute, at least there's a chance.
All right, John and Andy, thank you so much. Fascinating conversation. And now on to that story I was alluding to, a shocking one. As a result of something called birth tourism, a phenomenon where foreign nationals come to this country to just give birth with the explicit purpose of securing citizenship for their infant. Just in the last month, in a story that got very little attention, a worker at one of these host homes went on a gruesome attack, stabbing 2 adults and 3 infants, one as young as only 3 days old. This particular site was used primarily by Chinese citizens seeking to get that all-important U.S. passport for their infants. Joining me with more is Mark Krikorian, the executive director of the Center for Immigration Studies, and Mingli Chen is an immigration lawyer in New York in the area where this birth center was broken up. Mingli, I want to start with you. This story got very little attention, and you point out that some of these birthing centers are properly registered and some are not. Explain that.
Well, from my experience dealing with my clients and talking to other customers, I learned that some of the maternity centers are registered, but they are primarily registered as a daycare. But in the back, they are doing something else. They are doing the maternity center providing some type of food service to the mothers who give birth to the infants. They're providing this and that service without telling the government. So that is against the registration.
Well, in this particular case, Mark Krikorian was just absolutely hideous. The New York Times and the New York Post did big stories on this at the time, still being litigated. The carnage happened around 3:40 a.m. in this 3-story home in Flushing, where workers provide care to babies born in the U.S. in exchange for thousands of dollars. One of the employees, identified as Yufeng Wan, went berserk, attacked a 63-year-old colleague, a 31-year-old man, and then stabbed 3 baby girls, a 3-day-old, a 2-week-old, and a 1-month-old. And women show up twice a week, pregnant, have their children there, all right under the nose of New York officials.
Yeah, but I mean, a lot of these operations are going to be like this, kind of sleazy, I won't say black market, but they're not properly registered. And there are others that really are higher quality, but they cost a lot more. I mean, this is kind of This seems to have been kind of a discount operation. In other words, if you really had a lot of money in China and you wanted to get a U.S. passport for your kid, there's higher end versions of this kind of thing. And it's not just Chinese. There are Russian birth tourism
Miami
centers.
is a big destination for the
Russians.
Russians.
A lot of Turks come, Koreans, people from Mexico. This is a big business, and it's all legal. That's the problem. These people are not breaking our laws. We're the ones who have this setup of rules that lets people have a kid here. They wait for a month or two for the passport to come in, in the mail, and then they leave. At least the children of illegal immigrants actually grow up here as Americans. These kids, they never grow up as Americans. They grow up in China. They grow up in Turkey.
And they want the passport, again, reinforce this point. Why?
A couple of reasons. It depends on the people. One, it's kind of an escape hatch. It's like if things go bad in your country, and if you're in China or Turkey, you never know what's going to happen there. It's a way to get out, or at least get the kid out. I mean, look, the last helicopter off the embassy, you're a lot more likely to have your kid on it if he's got a passport. Also, when the kid is an adult, he gets to sponsor you for immigration. So it's kind of almost a retirement program for some people. And finally, it's a way of getting cheaper tuition. If you want to go to, say, University of California, Berkeley, foreign students have to pay more than U.S. citizens. So it's an easier way of getting into college. And then finally, for some people, it's a way of dodging the draft. If you're in Turkey, you don't want to serve in the Turkish army. I wouldn't. This is a way to, you send your kid here.
How do our framers did not, this is not what our framers intended. Mengele, I want to go to you. Is China cool with this? I mean, you work with a lot of immigrants from China, or people come here as tourists and they do this birth tourism. But is China okay with this? Not a problem?
China doesn't care. They don't care if somebody is coming out of the country going to the United States to give birth to the baby. They just care whether that person or any person like that in a situation will do something bad to the government. Otherwise, giving a birth to a baby has nothing to do with the Chinese policy.
And when you go to China, Mengele, you can just anyone who can go to China and you'll get Chinese citizenship, right? That's the way it works there?
Well, the China, as far as I understand, the Chinese policy is not. So,
yeah.
Is not.
Yeah, of course, you get. They have a little different system there, which is fine. But, I mean, they probably want to control their immigration and their citizenship a little differently. Mark and Mengele, thank you so much. And for more on why Trump won and how the GOP could do it again, grab a copy of my new paperback, Busting the Barricades, What I Saw at the Populist Revolt. You'll love it. It's in bookstores everywhere. And coming up, as the media busies itself with Trump's birthright citizenship ban, a new migrant caravan is actually storming into Mexico from Guatemala. The head of the